Shabbat Shalom. It is our pleasure to have you with us tonight at Manna from Heaven Ministries. We're live, and we're going to share with you what we've seen in the Torah portion during the course of this week. I promise you, if you'll indulge yourself in the Word, that He'll show you things as well, things that are hidden. This is the last days, and Daniel was told to seal up the book until the end, and I'm convinced with all my heart that the books that he's talking about are now being revealed. The binders have been broken off, and you're hearing things, you're seeing things that have been reserved, treasures in specific places that have been kept aside for the bride. Now let me just help you to understand how important you are. You know, the biggest problem that I see in the community today is a poor self-image. What happens is that we get, quote-unquote, born into the family, come out of sin, come out of Egypt. We begin to clean ourselves up. The enemy reminds you of where you were, who you were, what you did, and you wrestle so often with condemnation and guilt, forgetting that when Father forgives, He forgets and remembers it no more. And so when you're reminded of those things that were your shortcomings and failures and misgivings, and you go back to Him and you are constantly petitioning Him for forgiveness of something that He's already forgiven. And, excuse me, what are you asking about? I don't remember that. It's been blotted out. But you and I don't forget. The enemy doesn't forget. He constantly accuses us and reminds us, and guess what? A lot of folks around you don't forget either. And so they will help you to remember. And why I'm sharing this with you is because I want you to begin to see how Father sees you. Once you begin to immerse yourself in the Word, you're literally involved in what's referred to as a ritual mikvah, a baptism, if you will. The structured church today has lost all understanding of that. It's just a ritual that we think was shadow picturing the death, burial, and resurrection of Messiah. It is, but it's far more than that. That was almost as if that was the pinnacle of our relationship and it was downhill from there. That's not true. Every time you have an encounter in your life, you don't have to, quote unquote, get saved again. What you need to do is get back in the water and wash that stain off. You see what I'm talking about? And if we would remember that when He looks at us from a vantage point where He sees the blood that has covered us, and He sees the one who stands in front of us and hides us lest we be exposed. That's why love covers a multitude of fault. Are you with me? And what has happened is that we fail to understand not only who we are and whose we are, and if you stay relegated to that particular realm, you'll never be able to accomplish what He's called you to do. You will always set your goals, your priorities lower than what you should be trying to reach. And Father wants you to stretch yourself. He wants you to raise the bar. He wants you to begin to get out of the little shallow kiddie pool where you're in ankle-deep water. He wants you in the water where it's so deep that the current catches you and you have to trust Him to swim. That's what this thing's about. Well, in these Torah portions that He's been giving us incrementally, week after week, He goes into very graphic detail. A lot of it you will not ever see in the King James English, and it's so phenomenal. This is the understanding that you're gleaning from these particular teachings are simply because we take it back to the language of Eden, known as Hebrew, and it's the language Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 8 and 9 tells us that He's restoring right now. And we're venturing off into it. We're at the inception of this thing, the birth of this thing, and it's going to get better. The more that we dig deeper and gain a fundamental understanding of the Hebrew language, the more you're going to see the supernatural manifestation of His power like the world has never seen. We've talked about revivals for decades. Well, we're in the throes of the greatest revival that the creation has ever seen. And you were reserved for this hour. Well, this particular week's Torah portion teaches you how you can receive the benevolence of Yahweh in your life. And I want you to understand, the church has taught us that His benevolence, His grace, His free, unmerited favor was there available for you. All you had to do was just get in, and He would just lavish you with all sorts of things. That's wrong. Mercy is unmerited. Grace, on the other hand, is entirely different than mercy. We're going to examine that a little bit tonight, if you will. Tonight's Torah portion is taken from Leviticus chapter 26, verse 3, through 27, verse 34. And I know some of you listening tonight already have your hackles up when I start trying to mess with your grace, because we've used that sloppy grace as a license to wallow over here in sin and say, well, you know, I'm just an old sinner saved by grace. And so we can kind of stay over there with that foot still tiptoeing in sin. Are you with me? And the Torah teaches you need to be obedient and come out of that. Amen? Now, this particular Torah portion is entitled Bechuktoai, or Bechuktoai, however you want to pronounce it. And it's rendered into King James English as in my statutes. And it's intriguing, because what happens here is that Father begins to qualify what is necessary for you to receive His blessing. How many of you want His blessing? Amen. Well, He's going to qualify for you tonight in this Torah portion, and it's an exhaustive search that we're going to do in just a few areas. So we'll never begin to treat this entire subject, this entire Torah portion. We're just going to look at a few things, but we're going to go so deep into some of these things that it may take you days to climb back out. He's going to qualify for you what's necessary to receive His blessing. And in the process of that, just as I was sharing with you earlier, He's going to explode the fallacy of our understanding concerning grace that a lot of today's church teaches about, free unmerited favor. And conversely, He's going to teach you what literally is required for you to enjoy favor from Him and where that favor exudes from. You said you want it. Well, if you want it, here it is. Come and get it. You better hurry, because it may not last. There's a famine coming. You know, we could wrote a song out of that, couldn't we? There's a famine coming, Amos 8:11, in the land. And it's talking about right on the horizon. And that famine is from hearing, a famine of hearing the Word. And so if you're not getting it starting up now, honey, it's going to be difficult for you in the coming days. Say amen right there. Well, let's look at that particular verse that begins in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 3. Now, let me just stop here and show you something that is an anomaly in the Hebrew realm, because we're looking at these Torah portions. And you know that your Scripture is divided in chapters and books, sentence structures. And it's not an accident that this Torah portion begins in verse 3 of chapter 26. And so to get a proper understanding of what this Torah portion entails, you need to really go back and look at chapter 26, verse 1 and 2, because it's a segue into verse 3. Let me read verse 3 for you, and then we'll back up and I'll just touch verse 2 for a second. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them. Did you hear that? That verse is what starts this Torah portion. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them. Well, you automatically know that He's just made a qualifying statement, but you don't, if you don't go back to previous verses and put it in proper context, you don't know really what is qualified here. Well, the previous verse begins to touch it. He says, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am Yahweh. And then he says, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, and he begins to go even further into what's necessary for you to approach Him and receive that favor that He's talking about. Now, we're really addressing the favor of Yahweh and the grace of Yahweh. And as I've taught you on a number of occasions, whenever you're going to treat a specific subject, always remember the law of first reference. And it will set a legal precedent. Now, you need to also remember that everything in the kingdom is based on the fact that it's the law of sowing and reaping. So, you plant the word, you receive a harvest. Am I correct? Mark chapter 4, the parable of the sower. And that's why you're admonished to pay attention to what you hear, because the way that you measure it will determine the harvest that you receive. Well, that then becomes a legal binding document that sets certain parameters that Father himself now has to operate within. He'll not go outside the boundaries of his word. Are you following me? And if he's established certain principles and precepts, in other words, if he says sin has to be judged, I don't care how pretty you are and how special you are, he is not going to go outside the boundaries and set aside your judgment because he loves you. He has to judge sin. Do y'all see what I'm talking about? And so as we begin to treat this subject, he's setting some basic foundational precepts for you to receive his favor. And of course, the first time favor is mentioned, or grace is mentioned, in Hebrew it's the word chen. It's in Genesis chapter 6. And it was in regard to Noah, and it says Noah found grace in the eyes of Yah. And you have to then go back and put that in proper context to see why he found or how he found grace. And we know Genesis chapter 6 deals specifically with the fact that Yahweh is going to destroy the earth because of the relationship that the sons of Yah, the fallen angels, had with the daughters of men and produced offspring. The offspring then corrupted all of mankind except for Noah, Noah's wife, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, 8 people. Therefore, you can basically surmise that Noah found grace because he was obedient not to dilly-dally around with the serpent's seed and compromise the word of Yah. So he kept the word of Yah. He kept the statutes. He walked in the statutes and kept the commandments, and he did them, or else he would have compromised. So you can see how this Torah portion connects with a better understanding of grace than you probably have had before. Now, it may be a painful understanding. Amen? Well, what I'd like to do then is to take this particular verse, verse 3 of Leviticus 26, and I want to dissect it. 2 Timothy 2:15 says, study to show yourselves approved unto Yah, workmen. You know what that word workman implies? A workman is an individual that rolls their sleeves up and gets involved and digs stuff out and puts their hand to the task. So that automatically alienates about 98% of the church, because the vast majority of the church, y'all love me? The vast majority of the church are just eaters, takers. Are you hearing what I'm telling you? It's a sad indictment, but Yah is speaking to you so that you'll begin to understand you need to get involved and become a servant to the tabernacle and serve him, and in the process of serving him, you'll learn how to serve others, rather than always insisting that you're the one served. That's the problem. You've been served. As we dissect this verse, 2 Timothy 2:15 says that we need to learn how to do that so that we can be workmen that are not ashamed, and the only way you can keep from being ashamed is by rightly dividing the word of truth. And if there's one thing that I would like to leave a legacy behind me, should Yah tarry enough that my 120 years expire, I would like to be known as an individual that literally dissected the Word, took it apart verse by verse, word by word, letter by letter, number by number, and literally stood captivated all the days of my life in His presence. That's what I'd like to be known as. Well, this verse here is extremely powerful. The first phrase that I'd like to address is, if you walk. It's a qualifying statement. You want the grace of Yah, you want the favor of Yah. And you go back and, man, there's some powerful blessings. We were just singing about one of them there. He goes on in verse 4 of this chapter talking about He'll give you rain in due season, the land will increase, the trees of the field will yield their fruit, and on and on and on, talking about the blessings, but He qualifies what it will take for you to achieve that. And He says, if ye walk. In Hebrew, that phrase is rendered in basically one root word. Strong's number 3212, telechu is the phrase, and the root word that I want to focus on is the word yalak. The word yalak, say that with me, yalak, means to go or to walk. It's actually taken from